Panel session coming up on Australia's response to drought. The current drought conditions continue to challenge our farmers. The tough times have brought out the best in Australia and confirmed that there's a very special place for farming in the hearts of all Australians. Charities such as the Country Women's Association and the Need for Feed are translating donations of generous Australians into the help farmers need. Both state and federal governments have announced support measures, including the appointment of a National Drought Coordinator. If I could please invite now Major General Stephen Day, the Drought Coordinator, Danica Leys, CEO from CWA, and Graham Cockerell from the Need for Feed up onto the stage. This session is going to run with a short presentation from the Major General and also Graham. And the goal of this session is to not only have a really solid understanding of our National Drought Coordinator and how he is doing work to add value to the Australian farming families, but also to really showcase a couple of charities that have gone above and beyond their normal workloads to make a difference to Australian farmers doing it tough at the moment. So please join me in welcoming the Major to the stage.
I wish I was a Major again. I would have been much younger and more handsome. We live in a lucky country, but our journey is not always without difficulty. One of the more painful of our difficulties is drought, and its unwelcome shadow has returned to darken things for some. The Prime Minister has asked me to coordinate the national effort to bring together governments, the business community, representative institutions like many of you here, as well as charities, so that our work together brings the best possible effect for farmers and their communities that are experiencing the challenges of drought. I asked the Prime Minister if he would agree to me adopting a listen, then plan, and then act approach, and not to muck up that order. He agreed after a small moment of consideration and then added I was to report to him every day, which is what happens. What I wanted to do was to tell you a little bit of that story of listen, plan, act, and use those three elements to frame my conversation with you this morning. Let me deal with each of them in turn. Listen. I've done plenty of listening. Here's what I've heard. I heard Fred's story. Fred's been farming for 50 years out west of Tamworth. Fred's got 4 teeth left. Magnificent hands that can only be sculptured by 5 decades of hard physical labour. He dresses like a gentleman, but his clothes have seen better days. His business has not produced income for a couple of years. He, of course, has seen drought before. He prepared, but this one's gotten on top of him. And I've heard Annette and Barry's story, and they're here today. They've been farming for about 4 decades. They live way out west in the unincorporated lands of New South Wales. Sheep mainly. They've seen drought before. They prepared early. They sold their flock. Prices were good. They're actually getting through this drought okay. And in a way, both Fred's and Annette and Barry's story tell you the tale of this drought. It and its effects are uneven. It affects different farms and farmers and communities in different ways. It varies from region to region, from state to state. When you look at the performance of our agricultural industry across this great big wonderful country that is ours, it's actually doing okay. In fact, this year, the forecast is for the value of farm production to be above the 10-year average. But those aggregated figures can mask the real pain and suffering that some of our fellow citizens are feeling. So noting that the effect is uneven, and I was given some advice very early on, which is if you meet 5 farmers, you'll probably get 10 opinions. And I've seen a bit of that. Mr. Slide Man, can you put up the next slide, please? Mr. Slide Man's still at morning tea, evidently. Well, that is not the one I wanted to show you. I'll come back to that. There we go. Thank you. That is my summary of what I've heard across the country about what farmers would like. I hope that our conversation this morning will address, at least in part, the first 3 of those. Next slide, thank you. Which is nothing. That's good. So that's the listen piece. The plan. So we took that information, all that intelligence, what folks need, all the policies out there, and we went through a tried and tested military planning process to see how we would deal with this. And we started with the end. We started with what does success look like. Next slide, please. This is the last slide, by the way. What are we trying to achieve? What does success look like is on the right-hand side of that slide. It was endorsed early on by the Prime Minister. We decided that the best way to get there was in 3 phases. The first is stabilisation, which is dealing with the drought as it is now. The second is enabling the recovery. One thing farmers were universally clear on is that the drought is not over when the rains come. Incomes can take several years to recover. So that's a specific phase. And then the last phase, which is probably the most important, is how do we set ourselves up for long-term success? What does the long-term strategy look like? When this comes again, let's make sure we're in a better place. And then across each of those 3 phases, there are 4 lines of effort. Firstly, dealing with individuals and families as fellow citizens. Secondly, dealing with farms as businesses. Thirdly, helping the communities that grow up around and support farms. And finally, which looks like a bit of an odd person out, is information. My own view is that half of the challenges can actually be solved by getting the information piece right. And I'll have a little bit more to say on that shortly. Thank you, Mr. Slide Man. So, listen, plan, those are done with. I will, of course, always listen, and the plan will have to be refined as it meets reality, but we are now into action. A reasonable question to me is, so what the hell have you been doing, and what are you going to do? 3 early areas of focus. 1, simplifying the farm household allowance application form. Done. Whether it's sufficient is an open question, but at the moment, the anecdotal evidence from the field is that the simplification is helpful. There is a review of farm household allowance scheme writ large going on at the moment, and that is probably the next opportunity for any other major fiddles with it. 2, getting drought community program guidelines out and making sure that those guidelines are as simple as possible. Done. And money is available now. And just over half of the councils that are eligible for it, and there's 60, have put their applications in. Encouraging charities to work together in similar endeavours, like providing feed, for example. done. There is a lot more work to be done in this space yet, though. Those have been 3 early focus. What's on my radar screen right at the moment, beyond what I've just spoken about? Firstly, we are building a common operating picture. What the hell is that? That is an interactive map of our nation that has data put onto it from the Bureau of Meteorology, for example. You've seen their maps, rainfall deficiency, soil moisture. Overlay that with the nature of the farming in various geographical regions in our country. Overlay that with the areas that have been declared drought by the various state governments. Overlay that with drought community programs. Overlay that with where are the mental health service providers. Overlay that with economic data. Hopefully you're getting the picture. And that will give us, or should give us, a comprehensive understanding of what is going on out there. It will be the vital decision support tool. In some ways, it might be the most important thing that we do, or most useful thing that we do. Secondly, information. I mentioned it earlier. I think our most valuable asset at this point in time is actually information. There is an extraordinary range of programs, government initiatives at various levels that is available right now to help farmers and their communities. But it is not out there in language that is easy to digest and in a sort of one-stop shop. We need to get much better at getting information out to those who need it, and that will be a focus of mine. National Drought Summit comes up at the end of next week. What the Prime Minister is trying to do is to pick the IQ of the nation, people in the know, which is why quite a few of you here have been invited, to look a little bit at today. Is there something we've missed? Is there a bright new idea out there? But really importantly, how do we develop this long-term strategy? What are the best ideas out there? And as soon as that summit finishes, and armed with some of the information that's put on the table, we will start work on the long-term drought strategy for preparedness and resilience in our country. So listen, plan, act. Obviously there's more to say, but my time is out. But can I conclude on this note? For over 100 years, when your soldiers leave these shores and go overseas, they depart together. And when we get there, we fight together. And we take the approach that we will all win or we will all lose together. And it's the same back home here. We're all in this together. It's no good making it okay for our own mob and leaving it be ordinary for the rest, let alone throwing rocks at the other side. This is going to be good or ordinary for all of us. One thing I do know, getting through this drought is a team sport, and we Australians are fantastic at team sport. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your team. I look forward to travelling the journey with you, shedding a tear, but more importantly, I think sharing a laugh together. Thank you.
Did you want to speak, Graham?
Yeah, I think she wants you to go next.
Okay, we've got a slideshow ready to go. I think you were next, weren't you? Yep.
While we're getting the slideshow up and running, Danica, did you want to introduce the CWA and what you're doing for drought?
Sure. Actually, I do have just one slide that you might like to pop up while I'm talking about the CWA and the work that we're doing, just to have in the background, and I'll talk a little bit to one of the maps that we've got up on that slide. Thank you. So first of all, actually, can I just start by acknowledging NFF for the invitation. Thank you very much for allowing us to come and talk a little bit more about the CWA, who we are and what we do. And I should also start by thanking NFF for some of their the support that they've given us in terms of financial support for the work that we're doing in terms of the drought aid grants. And NFF have been quite generous in enabling us to do the work that we do, which I'm going to talk about. So thank you, NFF. I'd also like to acknowledge my state president in the room, Annette Turner from White Cliffs, as you've heard, is down the front here. And we've also got the national president from CWA of A, also a farmer, Tanya Cameron from Dorrigo, and a couple of CWA members. We have a CWA table, so it's great that you could all be here. Most of you would understand that that CWA has a really big role to play within our communities right across the country, but particularly in New South Wales and Queensland, and also now work is starting in Victoria and South Australia in terms of enabling the great donations that have been coming in from the public to be distributed to those in need. So the map that I've got up there that you can see, it's a couple of weeks old, so the numbers may have changed somewhat, but I think the trend is probably still quite the same in terms of, it gives you an idea of where some of our drought aid is going, and our aid from CWA is in the form of cash. We put money into people's bank accounts. And the reason that is important is not just because for the reasons of actually helping someone with a bill, with something that they might need assistance with. We believe that what we're providing is also a form of really critical rural stimulus. It's getting cash back into those regional economies that we care a lot about. We also play a critical role. The CWA is in a unique, I suppose, position in terms of we're a charity and we provide aid and we do a lot of fundraising, and I must also acknowledge the work of our branches and our groups right across New South Wales. We have about 400 branches and they've all been involved in either fundraising or on-the-ground help in some way, particularly in relation to drought, but CWA does a lot of work year in, year out on a lot of different issues. But really what we exist for at the end of the day is our policy and our lobbying and our advocacy work. So that is something that remains front and centre in terms of our focus at the moment on drought. I've got a picture up there down the bottom of, that's a picture from Armidale this year of our state conference. We have about 800 delegates to our state conference. It's a really big event. Our policy is driven from the grassroots up, and we take it very seriously, similar to the NFF, in terms of taking forward the views of our members and prosecuting that policy really hard. So we've been working hard in New South Wales to, and there have been some changes in relation to drought assistance from the government in New South Wales, and we're glad to see that. So I suppose I just wanted to highlight that it's the drought aid that we provide is very, very important. As I said, not just from the aid itself, which is obviously of a huge assistance, and we're hearing that the biggest way we can assist people is with cash and that rural stimulus side of things that I talked about. But the work that we do in providing a voice for rural Australia is actually really what we're all about. So we're doing both hand in hand. I think that's probably enough from me. I know we'll go to questions and we'll get a bit more time to talk, but that's just a bit of an introduction to the CWA. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Danica. Graham, would you like to share? Here we go.
Okay. As you can see on the screen, Need for Feed is a Lions Club project. We're Victorian based, and it's actually managed by the Lions Club of Pakenham, down where I live, near Melbourne. Okay. So it was established in response to East Gippsland bushfires and drought back at that time. 2006 was the height of what became known as the Millennium Drought, and back then reportedly three farmers per week around the nation were taking their own lives and many others walking off the land. So it was a local Lions project for a start, and was adopted by a Lions district, which is mostly Gippsland and the Mornington Peninsula. So how do we get to where we are now? So we've stood up to be counted in things like the Ash Wednesday bushfires in Victoria, the Black Saturday bushfires in Victoria, Australia's most deadly fires to date. And we were at the forefront of delivering aid to places like Coligny, Traralgon South and to Marysville first convoys into Marysville. Successive Victorian floods at Kerrang in 2011 and Numurkah and places like that the next year. So we're able to support dairy farmers to keep milking during those times. Hayfield fires the following years, so a pretty large fire down there. Moyston fires near the Grampians, other fires near the Grampians, and the list goes on and on. We are totally volunteer based. Most of our volunteers aren't Lions Club members, they're signed up volunteers for particular days or for the campaign. And we've come to the forefront probably for the things like the Barnawatha fires, Indigo Valley fires, and Scottsburn fires in the same year. That summer season, we're actually working on 4 different fires at once. So we've come a long way since giving away 1 truckload of hay. Our volunteers are all shapes and sizes, all ages. I was going to say all genders, male and female. Some of us are pretty old and some of us are pretty young, and we do like to start them young. We've had a Father's Day convoy just recently to New South Wales, and a lot of kids accompanied their dads to come and make a difference for the New South Wales farmers for Father's Day. As our support base has grown, so's the size of our trucks, the size of our convoys. So the Scottsburn bushfire convoys on Australia Day had something like about 60 vehicles in it, and that ranges from semis and B doubles right down to people just carrying a few bales of hay in their ute for the day. We get good support. 2016, the dairy milk price crisis. We put initially $10,000 into that, and with community support, networking and everything else, that ended up somewhere around about $5,000 worth of aid, and $500,000 worth of aid, and about the same in cash benefits handed out, which is like IGA food shopping vouchers. At the same time, in 2016, we bought about 20 semi and B double loads of fodder out of South Australia. That was our first interstate venture. And the following year, we went to the Dunedoo fires. Back in March, we started drought relief in Western New South Wales before it was popular, before it was in the media, before hardly anybody was talking about it, and we struggled back then to get media coverage. That's obviously changed in recent times. So we've sent truckload after truckload into New South, mainly.
The big wigs rolled into town carrying bales of hope.
This is our Father's Day convoy, which came through Dubbo.
The Aussie way.
Just helping the farmers out.
They're not alone. There's people out there that want to help.
Some know the struggle firsthand.
We're farmers. We've done it tough. We've done it really tough. So now's our opportunity, me and the wife, to help others out.
Down the main drag of Dubbo, 69 trucks caused quite the stir.
Unbelievable, even the locals, everybody waves to you. They all know what you're doing.
Tooting horns on the way through town.
They came from Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania, carrying close to 4,000 bales of hay.
Probably around about 450 families, that'll help. But that's out of over 1,500 that want help right now.
And they need not just fodder.
We've got women's health products, veggies, fruit, chocolates, Tassie stuff.
From here, the trucks will be heading
Not
to
sure what
depots
Tassie stuff is, but
Dubbo
we've had some great support from over there.
Communities in the northwest, where the drought is hitting hardest. There, it'll be divvied up and end up in the hands of those who need it most.
They're just running out of options and they don't know where to turn to.
The Lions not alone.
So this is where we've delivered to so far this year. It might be a little bit hard to read the key down the bottom there, but the yellow map pins up to 5 farmers on a depot. So they're depots, they're not farmers that we've delivered to. So our recipients are Firstly, they have to be a primary producer, so we ask for PIC number, ABN, and things like that, and with their main form of income from farming. So no hobby farmers, no corporates. You'll see in there's some, the red down the bottom is the Victorian fires back in March, and a little one in January in Gippsland. We were actually able to deal with them at the same time as dealing with the New South Wales drought, and we have also been doing deliveries into Queensland, southern Queensland, and into the edge of South Australia. So that's where we've delivered to. That 1,500 requests for assistance back then when that interview was done is now about 2,500, and you can see that they're spread from Queensland across to South Australia, with the majority in New South Wales. So that's pretty scary. We've dealt with about 1,400 of them so far, but that includes the fires. So of them, the drought is probably about 1,100 just for the drought. So we go back to that map, there's a lot of work to do out there yet. We're on the joint agency task force with people like Danica and Stephen, but most importantly, we are talking and trying to talk to the other charities who are delivering fodder. Awesome. So there's a big job to do out there.
Cool. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham. Have we got any questions from the floor for these fabulous panellists? If they're not immediately obvious. Danica, I might throw to you. Sure. You're obviously doing a fantastic job. People are donating funds, you're combining those funds and then delivering them to what's needed. What have you seen are the most important aspects of community support?
So we, as I said at the start, the overwhelming feedback that we receive is that the biggest assistance to people is actually cash, or cash is probably preferable, and that's what we do. We put money in people's bank accounts and they can use it to purchase what they need and go and purchase it in the town that they live, which is actually really, really important. CWA has its grant program really heavily geared towards household expenses, so we see that as very important. They're all the types of bills that don't stop in the middle of a drought. We're particularly keen and concerned, I suppose, to make sure that we get money to people that might have children and school fees, and keeping kids educated, keeping people being able to get their medical support, and household expenses, as I said, things that don't stop. That said, our grants at the moment are $3,000. That is not $3,000 is not intended and cannot sort of bail someone out that's completely in drought. What it does do, and the feedback that we do get, is it gives people a little bit of breathing space to meet a few bills that might be coming their way, take stock, and then also make some decisions about what they can do next. No one charity can cover all of the needs of people out there, and even the combined force of all of the charities is not designed, as I said, to completely bail people out. It is designed to give people a helping hand, and to give them that space to sit back and take stock of where they're at. Maybe so they don't have to have that conversation with their child, that they can't go on an excursion, that they don't have to make a decision as to whether I can buy groceries or whether I need to go and buy medication this week. Those types of things are the things that we see as important.
Awesome, cool, thank you. Got a question from El Presidente.
Thank you, kind facilitator. Look, just a bit of a Dorothy Dixer, and I know the answer, but I just think it's really interesting for everyone else to know the answer as well. Danica, you said quite rightly that the CWA has been the beneficiary of some of the NFF money. I just wanted to be really clear that that's not actually NFF's money, that it actually was generated through the campaign that we set up with Channel 9 and Rotary, where we collected money from the public on behalf of Rotary collected it for us, as a matter of fact, and we were able to then administer it through a task force that we set up that found the needs through the different states. So I think I just wanted to make sure that I clarified that bit. But I thought what would be interesting for everybody too is to talk a little bit about about where the money is coming from, because CWA, I'm sure, doesn't have, well, you might have, coffers of millions and millions and millions of dollars, and nobody does, as a matter of fact. But I think thinking about some of the numbers of the monies that are coming in, where they're coming in from, and when you divide the number of farmers and rural and regional communities by the number of money about and out, it's not very much money per person.
Thank you. Great question, and I probably should have covered that off at the start. So we've been, I suppose in very broad terms, CWA New South Wales has been the recipient of various donations from NFF through your fundraising efforts with Rotary and Channel 9, Red Cross, Coles, as well as I mentioned, our branches and members that do an amazing job fundraising on the ground. They do that all year round. We've been the recipient of around $5.5 million that's specifically for drought relief. Currently, we have distributed upwards of $2.5 million to about 1,500 different applicants. That's just New South Wales. Queensland CWA is doing an amazing job as well and has similar figures, actually very impressive figures they've been distributing on behalf of the Queensland Government as well. So that's where we're sitting. We've still got work to do to get it out. We are going through roughly about $300,000 a week in terms of distributions, and as long as we keep getting the donations, we will keep getting it out there. We do that it's important also, I think, for the purposes of this discussion, to acknowledge that we do that without any administration fees, so CWA do not take any administration costs out of that money. We fund the administration that goes on, because there is a cost, obviously, in the administration side of things. We fund that ourselves separately out of our operational accounts, and that's what we see as our charitable contribution to the cause.
Okay. Graham, did you want to add something?
Yep. In the case of need for feed, we've been in receipt of round about a bit over $1 million, round about 1.1 million in public donations. Lions Club donations from right around Australia are up around the $200,000 mark, and until a couple of days ago we had been in receipt of $500,000 from the Rotary Channel 9 appeal through the NFF, and another 500,000 hit the account about 2 days ago. So we've got, with that latest amount in the bank, we've probably got about just over $1 million in the bank, but we have ordered close to that in new season fodder, which is actually getting delivered now. So parts of northern Victoria have started cutting already, and we're getting some fantastic feedback about the quality of stuff that's getting delivered at the moment, which we are paying around about $300 a tonne for, which is a pretty good price for a quality product.
Awesome. General?
A few things on charities. First of all, they are staffed by wonderful fellow Australians who are trying to do the right thing in the great Australian tradition to stand up and help their fellow citizens in their time of need. And I've spoken to the charities about two messages that come clearly from rural communities, and they are conscious of the messages. One, do not affect the price of feed. Don't unnecessarily influence that. Two, buy local. And the CWA has been really important, I think, in helping ensure that is starting to occur. The other message I have is, I know there are a lot of folks here who actually aren't from the bush, but who live in the city. My message to you is, don't go and holiday in Bali, go and holiday in Broken Hill. The scenery out there is magnificent and stark and quintessentially Australian. Don't go and holiday in Whistler in Canada, not this time round anyway. Go and holiday in Winton. They have an extraordinary dinosaur museum there. Get out to the rural towns. Show your support, stay a few days, don't just go in there for a hot coffee. And that is, I think, a useful way that those of us who don't live in rural areas can make a contribution. And my next holiday is going to be to the rodeo in Charters Towers.
And then Broome.
Is Broome in drought?
No. It's just a nice place. There you go, little plug. Okay, so just in summing up, because we're unfortunately out of time, but could you guys give a comment each on your experience with and your thoughts on the engagement of this drought with people who are off farm and the impact that you think that's had? If I could just get a 30-second response from each of you, that would be wonderful in closing.
Yeah, look, I think we're overwhelmed with the generosity of people. We, much like Graham said, had started work on trying to provide assistance to families in drought sort of well before the mainstream media started to report it. And we had some money set aside that was fundraised by our branches. You know, you see the CWA stall in town selling scones and jams and things. It's hard to fundraise, but we have that money sitting there, but we want to get it out as soon as possible. But in terms of the general public, once the message actually started to get out there, the generosity has been amazing. People actually want to feel that they are helping and that they're making a difference. I think for me, it's a great illustration that this supposed country-city divide really, it doesn't really exist the way that we think it might exist. I live in Sydney as well, so I actually have a lot of friends who have no appreciation of farming practices, but they actually understand this issue and they actually understand that they want to help. So we've been really overwhelmed with the generosity. I think it's as I said, close that divide if it ever was there, and we just feel very privileged to be able to provide a mechanism for those funds that people want to see doing good, for a mechanism for those funds to get out there.
Yep. Thank you. Graham? From our point of view, I think the difference, we've been going about 12 years, and I think as time goes on, the big difference this year has been social media. The engagement from the public started way before the mainstream media got hold of it. And I really don't, there's probably mainstream media here today, but I really think that they didn't really sit up and take notice until the drought was on the outskirts of Sydney and Canberra. So, but it's been real for a long time. Social media is good and bad. It means that we're held accountable. We're quite comfortable with that. And we should be held accountable, but there's been the difference, I suppose. There's been some charity bashing out there on social media too. Some of it's probably warranted, some of it probably isn't, or a lot of it isn't. But I think the main thing that charities can do is be transparent, and we use social media to let people know what we're doing, pretty much on a daily basis.
Thank you, Graham. And finally, you, General?
I can't speak for the city folk, but here's generally what I hear. They say that because of you out there in the country, we eat better than anyone else does in the world. That because of you, we have a reputation for providing high quality, reliable produce for consumers around the world. Because of you, we have a $65 billion industry. And because of you, we retain a heartfelt, longing, somewhat romanticised relationship with the bush.
Awesome. Thank you very much, General. What a wonderful note to finish on. I feel very privileged to have been on this panel, because I think if you put these three fabulous people together, you've got the policy setting, and that's a really important part of drought management. So you've got your listen, your plan, and then act. And the General was very clear on the fact that it has to be in that order. You've then got the fabulous charity, which is CWA, and those women from the bush, I take my hat off. They can rustle like there is no one's business. And they're taking care of the household expenses, the sort of things that don't occur to people every day but are so important. So that's huge. And then you've got Graham with Need for Feed, who is actually providing the tucker for the stock to keep them alive. So I think with these three, we've got a beautiful collaborative drought management thing, and there are many more charities and organisations that are working. So please join me in thanking our very fabulous panel.